Hey, it's Soul. You know, it doesn't feel like it's been very long since I did the 7.2 video for Protection Paladins, and now here we are doing the 7.2.5. The main point of 7.2.5 is rebalancing. That means class changes, itemization changes, things like that, right before the next raid comes out, which is going to be the Tomb of Sargeras. I know I went through a lot of stuff about items and abilities and artifacts and all that stuff in the 7.2 video, but this is more like a quick update of what's going on now. So let's get right to it and talk about what is going on with Protection Paladins in the next patch. There are a couple of ability changes. Ardent Defender is receiving a kind of nerf, kind of not nerf. As you already know, Ardent Defender will keep us alive in case we were to take a killing blow, regardless of how hard that blow was. Haha, blow. The small change though is that there's going to be an upper limit as to how much damage we can take before the skill just doesn't work for us properly. In other words, as long as we don't take a killing blow that's more than 200% of our maximum life, Ardent Defender will still work just fine. If, for example, there's some sort of mechanic like a circle on the ground where everyone has to bunch up in order to split the damage, and I as a Protection Paladin just decide to eat it, if that happens to be more than, I don't know, 12, 13 million life, I'm gonna die. Overall, this doesn't really change much. This may mean that we need to pop an additional cooldown in order for Ardent Defender to work correctly. If we happen to be standing next to something, maybe using our active mitigation will help us lower the incoming damage enough so that Ardent Defender can work. All in all though, while it's a nerf, this is a nerf that's happening across the board with this kind of mechanic, so I'm not too worried about it. Talent-wise, there are some minor changes going on in the level 45 row. Both Repentance and Blinding Light are going to lose their damage component. And to be honest, while the damage is nice, I'm not really going to be sad to see this go. Personally, I use Fist of Justice more often than not. So aside from solo situations and maybe dungeons where there are multiple casters and I'm trying to interrupt them all, maybe Blinding Light will still help. But otherwise, as a whole with regards to our spec, there just isn't a whole lot going on with Protection Paladins. I don't mind. We're still doing okay. I have some minor gripes about our health pool still, but that's not that big of a deal. So let's move on to legendaries. There are two that are going to be introduced in the 7.2.5 patch, and let's check them out. The first are the Pillars of Inmost Light. They go on our shoulders, which doesn't conflict with anything. It has crit and haste, with crit being the more dominant stat, and that's okay. What this legendary does is take your Eye of Tyr and let it deal 3 times the normal damage, and on top of that reduce the cooldown by 25%. So it's not bad, but it's not super impressive. Getting an extra 15 or so seconds knocked off of our cooldown for Eye of Tyr is fairly significant, but as you know, Eye of Tyr does have its limitations, most notably that it has a range, and if we don't hit our target, that target's not going to get the debuff. Personally, I wouldn't mind if this legendary affected Eye of Tyr even more, like let's say it turns Eye of Tyr into a buff that'll just let us take 25% reduced damage from all sources, but maybe it'll either reduce or even negate the entire damage component. And I wouldn't mind that. It would pretty much be like having another Ardent Defender or, another defensive cooldown that I can use anywhere. As it is though, I'm not that impressed. There are other legendaries that are just more impressive than this one. If you happen to be rolling a fresh Protection Paladin, then hey, this is pretty awesome. It lets you do a lot more damage. You're definitely going to feel the effect of feeling stronger. Over time though, and as you get choices, this choice just is not as ideal than the others. The other legendary is the ring that everyone's been talking about. Ours is called the Soul of the High Lord. It's obviously a ring, it has a socket, and it has a piddly amount of secondary stats. It gives us both crit and haste and mastery. For Protection Paladins, we get Holy Shield, which I've got to say is pretty nice. As you know, Holy Shield increases our ability to block by 15%. We can block spells, and whenever we block anything, we reflect about 50,000 damage against our attacker, which isn't much, but it does add up. In the gear that I happen to be wearing in the PTR, I'm a little under 50% block. So from a throughput standpoint, this is a pretty impressive passive legendary. Tanking a bunch of mobs while throwing your Blessed Hammer and blocking with Holy Shield, while, let's say for example, you're using Last Defender to enhance your damage against these multiple targets, can add up. But when you put this against all the other legendaries, again, it's going to be a little bit hard for you to decide whether or not this is a very strong part of your legendary arsenal. The other thing is that as of this recording, we're not entirely sure how to get these rings. Of course, we can assume that getting these legendary rings is just like getting any other legendary, it's by chance. But given that its iconic name is representative of the class that we represent, in this case the High Lord, there are rumors about this being unlocked through a quest line or just by some other method that isn't just by chance. Of course, if I had to choose between the ring and the shoulders, I would definitely choose the ring. Beyond that though, especially because we're a tank, it's really going to depend on the situation, what kind of things that we're tanking, if there are multiple adds, and so on. So let's move on to the other gear since that has had some small changes too. Our 4-set bonus has changed a little bit. Enemies that are hit by Avenger Shield, and this could be either 3 or 5 depending on the legendary that we have, they'll deal 5% reduced damage to you for 10 seconds, and this is up from 5. And that sounds a lot more reasonable. If it was only 5 seconds, that's only 1, maybe 2 swings. At least with 10 seconds, there's much more impact and there's a bit more that we can plan for. I guess one of the problems that I had personally is that when you think about it, in order to maximize your absolute damage reduction, you need to have thrown down your consecration, you need to judge first, then throw your shield, but you need to have thrown your Avenger Shield at some point in order to maximize all the incoming damage that you're not going to take. And that seems a little bit unwieldy. At least the 10-second window will give me more of an opportunity to reduce damage with my normal rotation. And I think even with the change, that doesn't exactly make the 4-set bonus overpowered, it's still only 5% reduced damage. For the most part though, we can probably count on a very high uptime on this debuff if we're hitting the same target consistently. And that's without even considering the 2-set bonus. Moving on to trinkets, some of them have had small changes, others have not, but I'm just gonna kind of go over them from the top and let you know what I think about them. First, the stam trinket. And I know that there was someone who was pretty upset when I said, oh, you know, this stam trinket sucks, I don't even want to talk about it. And you know what? I still stand by that. 3095 stamina, and this, by the way, is the normal difficulty version of the trinkets. It's still only about 400,000 life, and to be honest, I don't find that to be very significant at all. On top of that, the on-use isn't terribly strong. It only absorbs 50% of 2.5 million damage over 10 seconds. The weird cooldown reduction mechanic doesn't impress me at all. As far as I'm concerned, it's still a 2-minute trinket. And really, I think I could just do better with a more throughput-based trinket. So let's move on to the Feverish Carapace. This is an armor trinket. This will give us strength, and on proc it's going to give you about 3,000 or so armor, and on top of that it gives you this kind of thorns damage that comes out as fire. This is also very unimpressive for me. It ups my physical damage reduction by about 8%, but the thorns damage is just really bad. This is something that I would happily give to my druid tank in case this dropped, but for me I would definitely pass. The Shifting Cosmic Sliver is kind of an interesting trinket. With this trinket, I gain stacks of a buff called Cunning of the Deceiver. This stacks up to 10 times, and then it becomes an on-use trinket. If I were to use this at 10 stacks while my Guardian of the Ancient Kings is on cooldown, it's going to reduce the cooldown of Guardian of the Ancient Kings by 100 seconds. If my Guardian buff is currently active, it's going to increase the duration of the buff itself by as many seconds, in this case again, 10. To me though, this is something that competes directly with the Breastplate of the Golden Valkyr. This legendary makes it so that your Avenger Shield will reduce the cooldown of your Guardian of the Ancient Kings whenever it hits a target, whether it's 3 or 5. Using them together will greatly reduce the cooldown of my Guardian, but to be honest, I don't really use it very often at all. Most of the time I'm chaining my many other cooldowns, like my Ardent Defender, my Eye of Tyr, my normal active mitigation, or whatever trinkets that I happen to have. So this could be a cool trinket to play with if you want to try to always have your Guardian of the Ancient Kings up, or at least try to have a very high uptime of it, but otherwise I'm not super wowed by it. The recompiled Guardian module has gotten a little bit more interesting than it was before, but it's still a little bit lackluster. This is a passive versatility trinket, but whenever I take damage, I'm going to get a heal over time, about 240,000 life over 6 seconds, which is very unimpressive. However, when this expires, me and up to 4 allies within 15 yards will also get a small bubble that's worth a little over 70,000 life, and this bubble lasts for 15 seconds. Now, while this doesn't sound very cool, well, it's not very cool, but in a small group situation like, let's say, like Mythic Dungeons or small dungeons, or in a raid situation where you happen to have a lot of melee with you, this is not a bad thing to have when it comes to maybe doing progression and you're trying to keep your team alive for as long as possible. But since this is a situational trinket, it's not very impressive. Obviously, I kind of have a trend of how I think about the trinkets in this raid. Except for this one, Leviathan's Hunger, and to me, it is the clear winner of trinkets for me in Tomb of Sargeras. This is an on-use with a 90-second cooldown, and whenever you use it on a target, it's going to deal about 1,000,000 shadow damage, and it slows them down, which is not important to me at all, but it's a 70% slow, so it might be significant in certain situations. What's really cool though is that this 1,000,000 or so damage that's inflicted over 8 seconds, that comes back to me 3 times that amount comes back to me, also over 8 seconds. So again, it's a 90-second trinket, it does 1,000,000 damage over 8 seconds, and it slows them down, When it does that damage, it comes back to me in the form of a heal for 3 times that amount, and the cool thing is that that heal can crit. So this can be a really powerful trinket to just pop on cooldown and to help keep yourself up. And again, since this is an 8-second heal over time, you can pop it whenever you're not taking damage, when you know you're about to take damage. It just feels a lot better that it's happening over time, so it doesn't feel like it's being wasted. And that's going to be it for this talk through, folks. I hope this video was useful, and if it was, like and sub for more content. Of course, if there's any other major developments on the Paladin side of things, I'll let you know in a future video or somewhere in the description below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. I'm Soul. Stay breezy, guys.